When I was a kid, I loved the Chicago Bulls. MJ and Pippen were my favorite. My little brother loved the Golden State Warriors, and his favorite player was Tim Hardaway. I want to walk you through some of the shoes that were on display in the Tim Hardaway exhibit in the basketball section of the ShoeZeum. So in the early 90s, Timmy played for the Golden State Warriors, and he was part of Run TMC. T stood for Tim Hardaway, M stood for Mitch Richmond, and C stood for Chris Mullin. And the Warriors were pretty good in the early 90s. Don Nelson was their coach, and they sort of made the small lineup famous. For a while, they didn't even have anyone on their team above 6'10". The shoes in front of me were made famous by Tim Hardaway. Over here are a pair of Air Raids that came out in 1992. These are the 2007 retros. And then over here, we've got the Air Bakin, which was originally released in 1997. These are OGs. And then re-released 12 years later in 2009. These are the retros. I want to walk you through these shoes and talk a little bit about Tim Hardaway. So Timmy went to the University of Texas El Paso, and he made famous the UTEP two-step, which was the killer crossover. Today they say that Kobe Bryant breaks ankles. Man, go on YouTube and search for Tim Hardaway. That guy had moves. He was so fast, and he was about 5'10". Sometimes he registered as 6 feet or 6'1", but really he was like 5'10", and he had a really unusual shot. It was sort of like a knuckleball, and he used to say, "I got skills," and people said his shot was ugly. Let's have a look at the Air Raid. This shoe was designed by Tinker Hatfield, and it was made for outdoor basketball only. You could not wear this shoe indoors or it would mark up the court with this black sole. You'll notice that the entire sole is flat, and that's because this shoe was made for street basketball, and Tinker said that it needed to feel the ground at all times. And these straps are really what made the Air Raid famous. This big X that you see on the upper of the shoe. It was also inspired by street basketball and the way that basketball players taped up their ankles. Tinker was sketching out this shoe, and Nike sent Mark Smith off to New York to watch street ballers play and sort of observe their needs for an outdoor basketball shoe only. You'll also notice that this shoe has bumpers up on the front and on the heel, and that was also to absorb the pounding. So there was a great ad campaign featuring Tim Hardaway and Spike Lee in the early 90s, and you can go on YouTube and check it out. Most people think of Spike Lee as Mars Blackman, but he was actually himself in the Tim Hardaway commercials. And they went outdoor, played on these funky courts. These shoes are amazing, and there was a whole piece lineup that had like Rasta, African colors. Very, very cool shoes. Let's put these down over here and talk about the 2014 retro edition that's coming out just next year. So we just found out that Nike's reissuing the Air Raid in a few different colors. These are the best ones in my opinion because they're the original ones and they remind me of 1992. Of the upcoming models, there's a pair that's white and gold, and they're going to be really dope too. One last thing to mention about the Air Raid, I can't help but feel like the X influenced Tinker Hatfield on the Air Jordan 8, which also features sort of an X pattern and then Velcro straps that hold the shoe together. It's amazing how one shoe has DNA that you can see in another shoe that came out maybe just a year or so later. All right, let's move on to the Air Bakins. We're going to start here with the retro edition. I used to pick these shoes up at the outlet stores and sell them on eBay during the retro era. But believe it or not, I actually owned the Air Raids and the Air Bakins originally back in 92 and 97. These are from 1997. You'll notice that they say Air on the back here, and it was very, very controversial. This shoe was actually recalled by Nike. I hung on to my pair instead of sending them back because Muslim people complained that the word Air on the heel resembled the word Allah in Arabic on fire. So these shoes were pulled back by Nike, and they were resold at the outlet stores, and Nike sort of put a patch covering the Air with a big swoosh. It also has that Air on the tongue, which they covered with another swoosh, and you can't really see because they're OGs, but in this little air bubble down here, it also says Air, and the people at Nike just took a Sharpie pen and covered it up. They sent them to the outlets and sold the cleaned up version, if you will. So I remember rocking this shoe back in '97, and people used to make fun of me. They said, "Are those Ronald McDonald shoes? They look like ketchup and mustard." The reason why they're red and yellow is because Tim Hardaway wore them as a member of the Miami Heat, and these shoes matched the jerseys of the Miami Heat. These shoes are absolutely sick, and they're retroing them again in 2014. These shoes are made for indoor basketball as opposed to these ones that were made for outdoor basketball. And when you look here, it says non-marking sole because the outsole of the shoe is black, and Nike wanted you to know that it was non-marking and that even though Tim Hardaway wore them and he made the outdoor shoes famous, you could actually wear this shoe indoor. By the way, in 2014, they're making a retro edition of the Raids that can be worn indoors as well. And they're going to be featuring lunar midsoles. Very dope. So I can't help but think of this shoe coming out in 2014 and imagining what it would be like if LeBron James broke them out. Usually in Michael Jordan's day, he wore Air Jordans, but there were a few times where he changed it up and wore other shoes. And I feel like for Nike to get the most of their athletes, they need to have them switch it up a little bit. Because can you imagine the hype for this shoe if LeBron wore them just for even a half of a game? It would be absolutely crazy. I'm sure that the ones that they retro will be the cleaned up version. They'll also be for indoor basketball. I think it's really dope that Timmy Hardaway's shoes are coming back out, especially because in 2007, Timmy sort of tarnished his image by saying a bunch of terrible things about gay people. I'm not going to repeat them here. Feel free to Google it for yourself. But it's too bad that Timmy's UTEP two-step killer crossover, his days at Run TMC have sort of been overshadowed by this interview that he did on the radio. But I love his shoes. I hope they retro them in the OG colors. I know they're doing it with the Bakins, the Air Raids. We'll see. Let's wait for 2014.